People say you get what you pay for. Roselyn Archer paid a single dollar for a diner the whole town swore was cursed, and that diner handed her back an entire life. While Preston Vandaele raised a glass to his own cleverness, certain his discarded wife would be sleeping in her car before the first frost, Rose was on her knees scrubbing 60 years of grime off a floor nobody else in Dunmore Crossing would touch. She did not know yet that behind a frozen wall at the back of that ruin, sealed shut since before she was born, sat the one secret capable of turning the man who erased her into the most hated name in the county. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If you have ever been written off by someone who was sure you had nothing left to give, stay with this one until the end. Because the moment Preston opens his front door 3 months later and learns exactly what his forgotten wife has been building, you're going to want to have watched every second that led there. Hit subscribe if you believe the people who throw others away rarely stop to check what those people are capable of finding. This channel is where we tell the stories the powerful would rather keep in the ground, the ones where patience does more damage than rage ever could. Give this video a like so it reaches somebody tonight who needs the reminder that being handed the smallest, ugliest thing in the room is not the same as being handed nothing. Now, here's where it starts. Roselyn Archer was 54 the afternoon she signed the final page of her divorce and felt 29 years of a life turn, in a single cold second, into almost nothing. The lawyer's office was chilly and smelled of new carpet. Preston did not come. He sent his attorney and a single sheet of instructions, which Rose thought might be the most honest thing he had done in years. She signed where the little plastic tabs told her to sign. When it was finished, the attorney squared the pages against the desk, said the firm wished her well in the voice a person uses to end a call they were never really on, and that was that. She had married Preston Vandaele at 25, back when he drove a dented pickup, and owed money to 2 banks and to his own father. In those first lean years, she was the one who kept the books straight. She called the suppliers when the checks bounced. She talked a nervous investor into staying one more quarter while Preston chased the deal that finally cracked Vandaele Holdings open into real money. Before any of that, she had trained as a cook. She had a plan once, a small breakfast place with hand-lettered menus and pie under glass. And she folded that plan up small the year Preston said he needed her at home. Every year after, the plan stayed folded until she could no longer remember which drawer she had left it in. By the time the marriage ended, Preston owned half of Dunmore Crossing. It had been a mill town once. When the textile plant shut its doors in the 80s, Main Street began a slow bleed that never quite stopped, and men like Preston learned that a dying town is only cheap real estate wearing a sad face. He bought the old hardware store and gutted it. He bought the shuttered bank, the bakery, and the shoe repair that had stood on the same corner for 3 generations, and he stamped the same clean sign over all of them. Vandaele Commons. People clapped at the ribbon cuttings. They needed the jobs. They did not always notice which pieces of the town went into the ground so the new thing could stand. Rose noticed. She had kept his records long enough to know the difference between what Preston said in a room and what he wrote down afterward. She just never imagined the accounting would one day be turned on her. The prenup she had signed at 25, without a lawyer, without really reading it, held like iron. The house sat inside an entity she had never been named on. The company, the land, the accounts, all of it lived behind a wall of paper Preston's attorneys had spent 2 decades building. And when the divorce came, that wall did exactly what it was built to do. It kept her out. The settlement left her with $91,000 and a deadline. 30 days to be gone from the house she had run for most of her adult life. On the last of those 30 days, Rose loaded 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of kitchen things into a 15-year-old sedan that was, by some small mercy, the one large object legally hers. Her whole company for the drive was an old Basset hound named Waffle, gray around the muzzle now, who climbed into the passenger seat with a groan and set his chin on the window ledge as though he already understood they were leaving and were not coming back. She sat in the car a while before starting it. Waffle sighed. Across the lot stood a billboard she had passed 1,000 times. Preston in a crisp shirt with his arms folded, Vandaele, building tomorrow, and beneath his printed smile, someone had long ago sprayed a word the city kept painting over and never quite erased. Rose looked at it, and for the first time in months, she felt something that was not grief. She had no name for it yet. It sat low and steady, the way an engine idles before the light turns green. She had somewhere to be that afternoon, though calling it somewhere was generous. What she had was a conversation she did not want, a town that had already picked its side, and $91,000 that would not survive a year if she rented like an ordinary person. No job, no references. Preston had not soured. A phone that had gone strangely silent the same week the papers were filed. What she did not have, not yet, was the faintest idea that the ugliest, cheapest, most avoided building in all of Dunmore Crossing was about to become the most important thing that ever happened to her. The conversation she did not want was about a gate remote and a box of photographs. One clause of the settlement required her to return every key and opener by the final day. That morning the housekeeper had called, awkward and kind, to say a carton of Rose's old albums had surfaced at the back of a hall closet, and did she want them before the crew hauled the last of the unwanted things to the curb. So Rose drove the sedan up the long, pale driveway she no longer owned, Waffle dozing against the door, and she understood the moment she rounded the hedge that Preston had arranged to be home for this. He stood on the front steps in the kind of casual clothes that cost more than her first car, watching a landscaping crew wrestle a row of young olive trees into fresh holes along the walk. Beside him, in sunglasses and a white dress, stood Kira Solt. Rose knew the name. Kira was 31 and had spent 2 years as the junior half of Preston's acquisitions team before she became something else, and she watched the dusty sedan roll up with the mild interest a person gives a delivery van. Rose parked. She left the engine running for the dog and the air, and she walked up with the gate remote in one hand. "Well," Preston said, loud enough for the crew to hear, "look who found the place. I half expected you'd get lost on the way." "I brought the opener," Rose said, "and there's a box of my mother's photographs inside." "Right, the photographs." He turned the word over like it amused him. "You drove all the way out here for a box of old pictures. That's about the size of it now, isn't it?" One of the crew slowed his digging. A neighbor, watering a bed that did not need watering, had gone still by the property line. "I like the box, Preston." "You know what I can't figure," he went on, ignoring her, warming to the audience the way he always did. "You had a good life here, and you're going to walk out of it with what? A car older than she is, a nod at Kira, and a dog that can't climb a step. No job, no savings to speak of. That lawyer of yours said it plainly. Unemployable. His word, not mine." Kira's mouth curved. She said nothing. She did not need to. Rose felt the old heat climb her neck, the flush she hated, the one that had made her feel small at 100 dinners while she swallowed whatever Preston had decided was funny that night. She let it come, and she let it pass. She stayed where she was. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The box is by the door," Preston said, tiring of her silence. "They can go. I've got people coming at 4. He came halfway down the steps and lowered his voice, so only she could really hear it, which was somehow worse than the shouting. "Let me give you some advice, since nobody else will. Don't fight this. You signed every page, and every page holds. Any lawyer you scrape together will take your 90 grand and lose it, and then you'll have the losing and no money both. Go find a little apartment somewhere cheaper, and let this be the last easy thing I ever do for you." Rose looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the nervous investor she had talked off alleged the year the company nearly folded. She remembered the books she had balanced at the kitchen table while he slept upstairs. Somewhere in the house behind him was a drawer with a plan folded up small, a little breakfast place with pie under glass, and she could no longer remember which drawer she had left it in. "You should be more careful," she said, "about what you decide is worthless." His face changed at that, just slightly, the smile going thin. "Is that a threat?" "It's an observation." She turned before he could answer, walked to the door, and picked up the cardboard box that held the only pieces of her life he had not thought worth keeping. It was lighter than she expected. She carried it down the steps past the olive trees and the frozen neighbor and the digging that had stopped entirely now. And she sat on the back seat beside Waffle, who lifted his gray head and thumped his tail twice, as if the errand were done and they could finally leave. She backed down the driveway, slowly. In the mirror, the house shrank, white and enormous, and no part of her anymore. And Preston had already turned back to his trees. He believed she was finished. That was the thing Rose held onto as she drove toward town with nowhere to sleep and a number in her account that frightened her. Preston Vandaele believed she had ceased to exist, and a man who believes that stops watching. He stops locking the smaller doors. He leaves the ugliest building in the county sitting untended for 60 years, because it never once crosses his mind that anyone alive would want it. Rose had not heard of the diner yet. She would hear about it that same evening, over a cup of bad coffee, from a waitress with tired eyes and a story nobody in Dunmore Crossing had been willing to tell since before Preston was born. The place with the coffee was a gas station counter on the north edge of town, 6 stools and a flat griddle, the last thing open before the highway went dark. Rose took the end stool so she could watch Waffle through the prop door. She ordered coffee she did not want, because sitting somewhere warm cost less than driving in circles, and because she could not yet make herself say the word motel out loud and watch the number in her account drop. The woman working the counter was past 70, thin, with reading glasses shoved up into gray hair and a name tag that read FAY. She poured the cup, took one look at Rose, and read the whole week off her face without asking a single question. She just kept the coffee topped up and let her be. After a while, Faye nodded at Rose's hands, which were rough at the knuckles in a way manicures never fully hid. "You cook." "I did. A long time ago." Rose turned the cup. "I wanted my own place once. A little breakfast spot. Pie under glass, the whole thing." She had not said it aloud in years, and it came out smaller than she remembered it. Something shifted in the old woman's face. Faye set down the pot. "There's a diner in this county nobody will touch," she said. "Been sitting sealed up longer than you've been alive." That was how Rose Archer first heard about the Silver Moth. Faye told it in pieces, the way you tell a thing you have decided not to think about. The Silver Moth sat out on the old county road, past where the streetlights quit. It had been the busiest counter for 2 towns in either direction until one night in the winter of 1962, when a man died on the premises and the owner locked the doors and walked away and never once came back. No auction, no estate sale. The building just went dark and stayed that way. The county took it for back taxes eventually and had spent the 60 years since failing to give it away. "People say it's haunted," Faye said, with the flat voice of someone who neither believed it nor entirely didn't. "Lights in the windows. Cold that finds you in July." The delivery men used to swear they heard the walk-in freezer running when the power had been off for decades. She shrugged. "Nobody local will set foot in it. Least of all the back." "Who would I talk to?" Rose asked. "If a person wanted it." Faye studied her for a long moment, the way you look at someone to decide whether warning them would do any good. Then she wrote a name on the back of a receipt. "Wendell Crane, County Surplus Office, 2nd floor, behind the clerk. Tell him Faye sent you." She slid the paper across. "He'll about hug you for taking it off the books." Wendell Crane did not hug her, but it was a near thing. He was a soft, harried man with a desk buried under manila folders, and when Rose said the words Silver Moth, he set down his pen like she had offered to remove a tumor. The property was a liability, he explained, talking fast, as if she might change her mind. Every year the county paid to insure a building it could not use, to fence it, to send someone out after every storm to confirm it had not fallen on anyone. There was a program for exactly this. Blighted parcels the county wanted off its ledger could be transferred to a private buyer for $1, provided the buyer assumed the back taxes and every ounce of liability going forward. $1, Rose repeated. $1, Wendell said, already pulling the form. The taxes owed come to a little under $9,000, payable on a schedule. Past that, it's yours and it's your problem, and I mean that as a kindness. Rose thought about $91,000 and how fast a normal life would eat it. She thought about pie under glass in a drawer she could no longer find. She took a single dollar bill out of her wallet, flat and ordinary, and set it on the folder. "Where do I sign?" The key Wendell gave her was long and old and cold in her palm, and she drove out to the county road with it while the light went orange and then gray. Waffle sat up when the pavement turned to gravel, ears swinging forward. The silver moth rose out of the weeds like something the years had forgotten to finish taking. A long, low building of dulled chrome and dead neon, and above the door the shape of a great moth spread across a sign whose bulbs had not burned since Kennedy was president. The windows were film gray. The lot had gone to grass. Rose sat in the car a moment, both hands on the wheel, and then she got out because sitting was no longer a plan. The lock fought her, then gave. The door swung, and on 60 years of held breath, dust and old grease and cold air rolling out to meet her. Her flashlight found a row of booths still dressed in cracked red vinyl, a horseshoe counter, stools frozen mid-spin. A wall clock stopped at 11:40. Everything sat exactly where somebody had left it the night the doors closed, as though the last shift had stepped out for a smoke and simply never returned. At the far end, past the pass to the kitchen, stood the heavy brush door of the walk-in freezer. Rose did not open it that night. She spread a blanket in a corner booth, and Waffle climbed up with a groan and pressed against her side, and for the first time in 30 days, she slept without dreaming of the house. The diner held its cold and its silence around her like it had been waiting, and somewhere in the dark at the back of it, the freezer kept its secret one more night. Morning came gray through the filmed windows, and Rose woke stiff in the booth with a clear head and a short list. Power, water, a working burner, a door that locked behind her. She wrote it on the back of the same receipt Faye had given her, because a list on paper made $91,000 feel like a thing she could ration instead of a thing she was watching drain. The power was the first surprise. She had expected the lines to be long dead, but when she found the main panel in the back hall and through the master, something deep in the walls shuddered, and a single fluorescent tube over the pass flickered, buzzed, and held. The county had kept a trickle of service to the building for the sump pump in the basement, the one thing standing between the silver moth and a flooded foundation. It was not much. It was a live circuit, and a live circuit was the difference between camping and living. Water took longer. The mains had been shut at the street, and turning them back on through the county meant paperwork and a deposit she did not want to spend. So Rose did what she had done as a young wife when the checks bounced and the utilities lapsed. She improvised. The diner sat on a well from the days before the town lines reached this far out, and the well still had a hand pump bolted to the slab out back, seized with rust but whole. She spent the better part of the day working penetrating oil into the joint, rocking the handle, cursing it, until it broke loose and coughed up a stream of cold, clear water that ran brown for a minute and then ran clean. She boiled the first week's worth on a camp stove before she trusted it. Then she bought a filter mint for backpackers, the kind that strips out the things that make you sick, and after that the well gave her all the water she needed for nothing but the labor of pumping it. The kitchen was a graveyard of good equipment. Rose walked it slowly, the way you read a room before you decide what it can become. The big flat-out griddle was solid iron under 60 years of hardened grease, and iron does not care about time. She scraped it down over 3 days, layer by black layer, and seasoned it with oil and heat until it went smooth and dark and shed water and beads. 2 of the 6 burners on the range still lit. The ventilation hood was choked but intact. The dish sinks held pressure once she cleared the traps. She scrubbed. That was most of those first weeks, plain and endless. On her knees with a bucket and a brush, taking the floor back 1 square foot at a time, and under the grime the tile came up a soft checkerboard of cream and green that somebody had chosen with care a long time ago. She washed the windows until the gray came off in sheets, and real daylight fell across the booth for the first time since the Beatles had a first record. She was not restoring anything yet. She was only finding out what was still there. Feeding herself was its own arithmetic. Rose knew food the way Preston knew paper, and she put that knowledge to work. She learned which of the county's 2 grocery stores marked down its produce on Thursday evenings, and which threw out day-old bread on Sunday nights. Still good, still soft, bagged, and set by the loading door for anyone with the sense to ask. She learned that the bakery 2 towns over would sell a person the ends and the broken things for a fraction of nothing. She planted a narrow bed along the sunny side of the building, herbs and greens and tomatoes, seeds that cost less than a cup of coffee and paid her back for months. She was eating better on almost no money than she had eaten at Preston's long dinners, and she was eating food she had made with her own hands. The math of it stopped her cold one evening at the counter, a pencil going down a column the way it used to. Rent, 0. Water, 0. Power, near enough to 0. Food, less than a month than one of Preston's dinners had cost in a night. The $91,000 she had been watching drain was not draining. It was sitting there, whole, growing a little interest, and every day she did not spend it was a day added to the front of her life instead of taken off the end. Preston had stood on his steps and called her unemployable. His lawyer had written the word into a document and made her sign near it. And here she was running a building on a well and a griddle and her own 2 hands, solving in an afternoon the kind of problem those men would have hired 3 people to fix. She had built things before. She saw that now, clearly for the first time. The books she had balanced. The investor she had talked down. The suppliers she had managed while Preston took the meetings. She had spent 29 years being the reason things did not fall apart. And somewhere in those years, she had let 2 men convince her that keeping a thing standing was not the same as building it. The Silver Moth was standing because of her. It had not stood in 60 years, and now it stood, and she was the reason. She looked down the length of the clean, bright room to the brushed steel door at the back of the kitchen. The walk-in. She had worked around it for weeks. Some part of her had known from the first night that whatever the Silver Moth truly was, it was in there behind that cold door, waiting. She was not ready. Soon, but not yet. Tomorrow there was more to do, and for the first time in a long time, tomorrow felt like hers. Cleaning had shown Rose what was still there. The next stretch was about making it beautiful again, and beauty, she discovered, was mostly patience wearing work gloves. She started with the chrome. The Silver Moth had been built in an age when a diner was supposed to gleam like the front of a locomotive, and under the dullness the metal was solid, waiting. Rose worked it with fine polish and a rag and a great deal of her shoulder, and the counter's edge came back first, a long bright ribbon of it catching the window light. Then the trim on the booths. Then the tall, fluted legs of the stools. Every surface she brought back seemed to lend her the will to do the next one, and the room began, slowly, to shine the way its makers had meant it to. The booths themselves were split and cracked, the red vinyl gone brittle. Rose could not afford a reupholsterer, so she became one. She found bolts of vinyl at a salvage outfit that supplied restaurants going under, close enough to the original red that no one but her would ever know, and she taught herself to work off library videos, cutting and stapling and tucking until the seats sat firm and whole. It took her a month of evenings. She did not mind. Each finished booth was a small country reclaimed. She furnished the rest of the room the way the woman in the subway story might have envied, out of the endless generosity of what other people threw away. A dying town sheds furniture the way a tree sheds leaves, and Rose learned the rhythm of it. She found a wooden hutch at a curb and turned it into a place for pie under glass. She found mismatched china by the boxful at estate sales for $1 a stack, heavy old dinerware, and mismatched somehow looked right, looked like a place with a history instead of showroom. She found a jukebox with a cracked case in a barn auction, dead but reparable, and a man 2 towns over fixed the mechanism for the price of a week's worth of her tomatoes. The sign was the thing she was afraid to touch. The great moth over the door, wings spread across the whole face of the building, had not lit since 1962, and its wiring frightened her honestly. She saved it for last. When she finally climbed the ladder and opened the housing, she found the old neon tubes mostly intact, just one wing cracked and the transformer long dead. She could not do neon herself, but she had a little money set aside now from the first trickle of what the diner was quietly starting to earn, and she spent it on a sign man who came out grumbling and stayed fascinated. And one evening near the end of her 3rd month, he threw the switch, and the Silver Moth spread 2 great wings of soft blue-white light across the county road for the first time in 60 years. Rose stood in the gravel lot with Waffle and watched it burn against the dark, and she did not trust herself to speak, because by then, people had started to come. It began with a man in a work truck who saw the lights on and stopped, half certain the place was finally being torn down, and found instead a clean, bright counter and a woman who offered him a cup of real coffee and a slice of pie for whatever he thought was fair. He came back the next day with his brother. Word in a small town moves faster than any sign. Within a few weeks, the Silver Moth had a morning crowd, farmers and truckers and old-timers who remembered the place from childhood and could not quite believe their eyes. Rose never advertised. She just unlocked the doors and cooked, and the town found her. Faye came out one gray afternoon, the waitress from the gas station counter, and stood in the doorway with her hand over her mouth and her eyes wet, looking at the booths and the shine and the moth burning overhead. "I serve here," she said finally, so quiet Rose almost missed it. 1961. I was 17. She walked the length of the counter slow, touching it, and she did not say anything else for a while. Then she took an apron off the hook by the pass, tied it on without being asked, and started clearing plates like no time had passed at all. Rose did not argue. She had built a place. Now it had built her a person to share it with. She realized one night, after the last customer had gone, happy. Not the brittle contentment she had worn like a coat for years in Preston's house. Something with a floor under it. She had walked into this ruin with 2 suitcases and a dog and a folded-up plan she could no longer find, and she had unfolded it here on the county road in a building the whole town had been afraid of. Faye lingered that same night, wiping down a counter that was already clean. She had gone quiet in a way Rose was learning to notice. Finally, the old woman spoke, not turning around. "You'll want to leave the back alone," Faye said. Rose looked up. The freezer. The night that man died in 62. Faye's rag stopped moving. He wasn't found out here in the dining room. He was found in the walk-in. And the owner locked that door before he locked any other, and he sealed it, and then he sealed the diner around it. She turned then, and her tired eyes held something Rose had not seen in them before. "Whatever's in that room, honey, it's the reason the Silver Moth's been dark for 60 years. Not ghosts. Something a man wanted stayed cold and stayed shut." Rose looked down the bright length of the room to the brushed steel door at the back, and the low, steady thing in her chest, the engine that had been idling since the driveway, shifted at last into gear. Tomorrow, she was going to open the freezer. She opened the freezer the next morning, before the first customer, with Waffle watching from the pass and a pry bar in her hand she did not end up needing. The heavy brushed door gave with a sucking sound, and a breath of cold rolled out over her feet, and that was the first wrong thing. The room was cold. Truly cold, a working cold, the kind that only comes from a compressor that is running, and Rose stood in the doorway with the hair rising on her arms because the Silver Moth had sat sealed and dead for 60 years, and no dead building holds a chill like that in the middle of summer. She found the reason in the back hall an hour later, and it was worse than a ghost. The walk-in's compressor was wired to the same essential circuit as the basement sump pump, the one line the county had kept alive all these decades. Someone had done that on purpose. Someone had made certain that whatever else the town let die out here, this one room would never, not for a single hour, be allowed to thaw. Faye's words came back to her at the counter, flat and certain. Something a man wanted stayed cold and stayed shut. The inside of the walk-in was nearly empty. Old wire shelving, a few rusted tins, nothing. But the back wall was wrong the way the cold was wrong. The panels on 3 sides were the original galvanized steel, dulled and honest with age. The back wall was newer. The seams did not match. Somebody had built a false wall across the rear of that freezer, and built it well, and Rose ran her fingers along the cold joint of it and felt, faintly, a draft coming through where no draft should be. She was still standing there when she heard the bell over the front door and a man's voice call out, "Health and Building, County Office. Anybody on site?" Her stomach dropped straight through the floor. She came out wiping her hands, and the man by the counter had a laminated badge clipped to his shirt and a clipboard under his arm and the careful blank face of someone about to deliver bad news for a living. Dominic Ashby, the badge read. He was maybe 40, tired around the eyes, and he looked at the gleaming booths and the pie under glass and the jukebox with an expression Rose could not read. "You're operating," he said. It was not a question. "Serving food. Taking money. I've had 3 calls this week telling me the old silver moth's alive again, and I came out figuring it was kids. He set the clipboard on the counter. Ma'am, I have to be straight with you. You've got no food license, no current inspection, no certificate of occupancy on a structure that's been condemned to storage for 60 years. I could padlock this door today, and I'd be within my rights 10 times over. Rose gripped the edge of the counter. Everything she had built rose up in front of her, and she watched a stranger with a clipboard get ready to take it. The same helpless way she had watched a locksmith and a lawyer take the last thing before this one. Please, she said. I know how this looks. I'll do whatever the paperwork needs. Just don't close it. This is everything I have. Dominic looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked more slowly at the room. He walked a few steps along the counter, taking in the hand-stapled booze, the polished chrome, the checkerboard floor she had brought back on her knees. You did all this yourself, he said. Yes. How long? A little over 3 months. He shook his head slowly. Something in his face had changed, the official flatness gone soft at the edges. I've been doing this job 11 years, he said. You want to know what I mostly do? I shut things down. Slumlords, roach kitchens, people cutting every corner there is. I almost never walk into a place that's better than the code, built by hand, by one person, for the love of it. He tapped the clipboard, not writing. My mother ran a lunch counter when I was a kid. After my dad left, she kept the 3 of us alive off a griddle about that size. County shut her down over a permit she couldn't afford the year I turned 12. He was quiet a beat. I know exactly what this room is. Rose did not trust herself to answer. Here's what we're going to do, Dominic said, and now he did start writing, but it was different writing, a list, not a citation. I'm not closing you. I'm going to walk you through getting legitimate, the real way, so nobody can ever take it from you again. The food license is cheap. The occupancy permit needs a couple of fixes I can see from here, and they're small. Do them right, and in 60 days you're operating legal, protected, and nobody with a clipboard, including me, can touch you. He tore off the sheet and slid it to her. That's my direct number at the bottom. Anybody from the county gives you trouble before that paperwork clears, you call me. Rose looked at the number and felt her eyes sting for the second time in a week. Why, she managed. Because somebody should have done it for my mother. He picked up his clipboard. At the door he paused, glancing back toward the kitchen, toward the cold breathing out of the open walk-in. One thing, that freezer's running. On what power? Whole building's supposed to be dead, but for the pump. I don't know yet, Rose said. It was almost true. He held her eyes a second longer, then nodded like he had decided not to ask. Get looked at. Cold that won't quit usually means somebody paid to keep it that way. And he was gone, the bell swinging behind him. Rose stood alone in the bright room. Then she took a flashlight and the pry bar and walked back to the walk-in, to the false wall at the rear of it. And she set the bar into the mismatched seam and pulled until the cold metal groaned and gave, and a black gap opened behind it, breathing 60 years of held air into her face. She raised the light and looked into the dark, and what it caught made her forget how to breathe. The gap breathed at her, and the cold that came out of it was older than the cold of the rest of the room, still and dense. The air of a place that had not been opened since the world outside. It was black and white. Rose ducked through the broken seam with the flashlight held ahead of her. The false wall had hidden a chamber not much bigger than a closet, lined floor to ceiling in the same galvanized steel, sealed and insulated with a care that told her everything. Somebody had not thrown this together in a panic. Somebody had built a room to last inside a room already built to keep the cold. The light found the strongbox first, a heavy steel case on the floor, and beside it a stack of parcels wrapped in oilcloth and bound with twine gone stiff as wire. Then the beam drifted up and to the left, and Rose's breath stopped in her throat. A man sat against the far wall. He had been there a very long time. The cold had kept him with a terrible faithfulness, so that he was not the horror she might have braced for, but something quieter and far worse. A person, still in the clothes of another decade, a thin tie and a cheap jacket, one hand resting open on the floor beside him as though he had simply grown tired and sat down to wait. Rose pressed her back against the steel and made a sound she did not hear herself make. Waffle whined from the kitchen behind her, sensing it through 2 walls. She stood shaking in the dark for a long moment. Every decent instinct in her said the same word, and the word was police. A dead man was not a secret to keep. It was a thing you called about, right away from the nearest phone. Then she made herself kneel by the strongbox because some colder instinct told her that if she called first and understood second, this room might vanish the way it had vanished once before. The box was not locked. Inside, wrapped against the damp, were ledgers, letters, and a thick fold of paper covered edge to edge in a cramped, careful hand. The letters were the first thing she read, and the letters were signed with a name. August Vandaele. Rose sat down hard on the freezing floor. She read for an hour in that chamber, the flashlight in her teeth, her hands going numb, the dead man 3 feet away, and the story assembled itself out of the pages the way a face assembles out of fog. In the winter of 1962, the county's whole life had run through the textile mill, and once a month the mill's cash payroll came in by armored car and sat overnight in the office safe. That winter it was stolen. A large sum, more than most men there would earn in 3 lifetimes, gone in a single night, and the mill's young bookkeeper gone with it, and the county was told the bookkeeper had turned thief and run. He had not run. He had been brought to the Silver Moth, and he had died in the walk-in, and he had sat behind that false wall for 60 years while the town spat his name. The man who owned the diner then was named Halbert Mercer, and it was Mercer's cramped hand that filled the folded pages. He wrote it all down because he was afraid and because he wanted at the very end of some coward's road one honest thing to exist. August Vandaele had been land-rich and cash-dead, drowning under acreage he could not pay the taxes on, the same county road frontage the diner sat on. August planned the theft. Mercer helped him. The bookkeeper had recognized August, and so the bookkeeper could not be allowed to talk. And when it was over, August took the stolen payroll and turned it into the first clean-looking dollar of a fortune. He paid his taxes. He bought more land. He never went hungry again, and neither did his son, and neither did his son's son. Mercer sealed the body and the money in his own confession behind steel, and he wired the freezer to the one circuit the county would never cut, and he kept it cold for the rest of his life. Not to hide it, to hold it. As long as the room stayed frozen and sealed, August could never be sure it would not surface, and so August could never come for him. It was the only leverage a frightened man had, and it had kept them both silent until they were both in the ground. The oilcloth parcels were the payroll. Bundled bills, serial numbers still legible, 60 years old and never spent. And the name at the bottom of every crime in that box, the seed of every acre and every ribbon cutting and every clean printed sign in Dunmore Crossing, was Vandaele. Preston's grandfather. Preston's whole inheritance. The money that had built the wall of paper Rose could never climb. The money that had paid the lawyers who called her unemployable, traced backward through 3 generations to a frozen room and a murdered man in a cheap tie. Rose photographed every page, every letter, every ledger line, the serial numbers, the confession, all of it, and she uploaded the images to 3 separate accounts before she let herself climb back out into the light. She did not tell Faye what was in the room. She only asked, carefully over coffee that evening, what the old woman remembered about the mill payroll and the boy who took it. Faye went very still. Then she said a name Rose had already read on a mill employment card in the strongbox, and her voice cracked on it, and she said, "He was my brother. Everyone said he ran. Our mother died believing it. 60 years this town called him a thief." She looked up, and something in Rose's face must have told her, because her eyes filled. "He didn't run, did he?" "No," Rose said gently. "He didn't." That night, from a borrowed laptop and an encrypted account, Rose wrote to a lawyer she had never met, a woman named Sabine Cole, who took the kind of cases nobody wanted, and she laid out the facts without the names. Sabine's reply came within the day, and it was steady and clear. There was no clock on this. Murder had no statute of limitations. Physical remains, a contemporaneous written confession, and traceable stolen funds could reopen a homicide 60 years cold, and every asset that could be traced to those funds could be pulled back into the light. The people who had inherited that money did not have to have known its origin to lose it. Rose set down the phone in the dark diner. down the length of the bright, quiet room, past the pie under glass and the sleeping dog. The walk-in breathed its old cold into the kitchen, and she understood at last exactly what she was holding. She was holding the first dollar of the Vandaele Empire, and it had a dead man's fingerprints on it. Rose did not mail anonymous packages to a fraud desk. What she held was not a paper crime. It was a man, 60 years dead, and he belonged in the hands of people with badges and the authority to reopen the ground. So she let Sabine Cole carry it through the right door. On a Tuesday morning, a state police cold case investigator and a deputy from the county prosecutor's office stood in the walk-in of the Silver Moth with their breath clouding in front of them, looking at a false wall, a strongbox, 60 bundles of decades-old payroll, and a confession written in a frightened man's hand. By afternoon, the county road was blocked with unmarked cars, and the diner Rose had brought back from the dead became, for a few strange weeks, a crime scene 60 years in the making. The forensic work confirmed everything the pages had already told her. The remains were identified through mill dental records, as the young bookkeeper of the county had called a thief since Kennedy was in office. The serial numbers on the bundled bills matched the mill payroll reported stolen in 1962. And Halbert Mercer's confession, tested and dated and authenticated, named the man who had planned the theft and ordered the killing and walked away with the money that started all. August Vandaele, Preston's grandfather, the founder of the fortune. The story broke bigger than anything Dunmore Crossing had seen. It was not a quiet item about a businessman and a tax bill. It ran on the front page under the words that the whole county would repeat for a year, the discovery that the Vandaele name, the name on the ribbon cuttings and the clean printed signs, had been built on a stolen payroll and a body kept frozen for 6 decades. Reporters came from the city. The billboard with Preston's folded arms came down within the week, and this time no one bothered to repaint the word underneath. Preston Vandaele had not committed the murder. He had not yet been born the winter his grandfather sealed that room. He kept saying so, loudly, to anyone who would hold a microphone, and it was true, and it did not save him. Because the law does not care whether the person holding stolen money knew where it came from. Every asset Sabine's team could trace back to that original theft was frozen and then forfeited. The acreage August had saved from the tax rolls, the frontage the diner itself sat on, the compounded ground beneath 3 generations of deals. The bulk of the Vandaele estate did not pass to Rose. It went where stolen things go, into forfeiture and restitution, back toward the mill families it had been taken from in the first place, which struck Rose as the only clean ending the money could ever have had. What passed to Rose came through a different door. Sabine reopened the divorce, and the wall of paper that had kept Rose out for a lifetime finally cracked, because a prenup can shield a man's separate property only when that property is honestly his. Preston had sworn to the court that his estate was legitimate and clean. It was neither. The settlement Rose had been forced to sign was void the moment the freezer opened. The court awarded her a little over $3 million from the portion of the marital estate that survived the forfeiture, and it confirmed what she already had. The Silver Moth was hers, free and clear, taxes forgiven, the deed clean. Preston's net worth, by the end, was mostly lawyers' bills and a name no one in the county would say without spitting. But the piece of it that mattered most to Rose had no dollar figure at all. The state formally cleared the bookkeeper's name. His case was closed as a homicide, the theft charge against him withdrawn 60 years late, and the correction read into the county record on a gray morning with a small crowd, standing in the cold. Faye stood at the front in her good coat, 73 years old, listening to a man in a uniform say aloud that her brother had not run, had not stolen, had died an innocent man and been slandered for a lifetime because it was convenient. When it was over, she walked to a grave that had sat unvisited for decades, the grave of a mother who died believing the lie, and she stood there a long while, and Rose stood a few steps back and let her have it. They put a new stone at the brothers' plot that spring. Rose paid for it and let Faye choose the words. Preston sent word, near the end, through Sabine. He wanted to see Rose. He wanted, the message said, a chance to apologize. Rose thought about it for the length of time it took to pour a cup of coffee and set it in front of a regular at the counter. Then she told Sabine no. She did not need the apology, and she did not owe him the scene. He had been the reason she left the house with 2 suitcases and a dog. He had never once been the reason she got up off that floor. The silver moth is still out on the county road, and the great moth still burns 2 wings of blue-white light across the dark every night. People drive an hour now to sit in the hand-stapled booths and eat pie under glass, some for the food, and some because they read the story and wanted to see the place where it happened. A preservation trust listed the building as a landmark, which means the wings will keep burning long after Rose is gone. Faye works the counter 3 mornings a week because she wants to, and Waffle sleeps in a patch of sun by the door and lifts his gray head for anyone who scratches behind his ears. Rose kept the corner booth where she slept that first cold night, and she never had it recovered. The vinyl is cracked, and she leaves it cracked. On slow evenings, after the last plate is cleared, she sits in it with a cup of coffee and the lights low, in a building the whole town was afraid to enter, that she bought for $1 and made worth more than the empire that tried to erase her. She was handed the smallest, ugliest thing in the county. She looked behind its coldest wall, and she found the truth that set 2 people free, the murdered man who finally got his name back, and herself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.